Okay. So because of the incident that had happened on December 7th, 2012 on Friday night at around 6 p.m., this is why my face looks like this. So I got two black eyes. So I got this gash right here, an inch long gash. I got like a little piece of tape over it now, but it needs stitches. Um, my fucking nose is bent all this shit and it's busted to pieces, they said. And then they took the x-ray. So I got the doctor's report here. And the doctors report the technique that they used was multiple contiguous 1.5 millimeter axial computed tomographic images were obtained through the facial bones without intravenous contrast administration. Coronal reconstructions were also reviewed. The findings: there are acute, mildly displaced, and mildly comminuted com, comminuted fractures of bilateral nasal bones with slight depression of the right nasal bone, with fractures extended near the junction of the nasal bones with the anterior maxillary spine bilaterally. There's also a fracture of the nasal septum, which may be segmental with focal acute right-sided deviation of the anterior to mid-nasal septum. No other facial fractures are seen. There is minimal hemorrhage or mucosal thickening in bilateral ethmoid air cells, and there may be trace mucosal thickening in the right maxillary and sphenoid sinuses. The remaining paranasal sinuses and mastoid air cells are clear. There is mucosal thickening at the ostium of bilateral osteomeatal complexes, which may cause low-grade partial obstruction, particularly on the right. Bilateral mandibular condyles are appropriately seated within the mandibular fossa. Bilateral orbital globes and orbital structures appear intact. I don't know what hardly any of that means. So the impression, number one, the acute, mildly depressed, comminuted fractures of bilateral nasal bones with slight depression of the right nasal bone. The fractures extend near the junction of the nasal bones with the anterior maxillary spine bilaterally. Segmental fracture of the nasal septum with acute right-sided deviation of the anterior to mid-right basal septum. The third impression is minimal hemorrhage versus mucosal thickening in a few bilateral ethmoid air cells. Trace mucosal thickening in the right maxillary and sphenoid sinuses. Mucosal thickening at the ostium of bilateral osteomeatal complexes with perhaps low-grade partial obstruction, particularly on the right. Facial CT performed without contrast. The study was independently viewed by me and interpreted by the radiologist. Um, Progress and procedures. Course of care. Patient is a 30-year-old male without significant medical history. Presents to University Health following run-in with the police complaining of severe nose and facial pain, bleeding from the nose with an obvious naval deviation. The patient states that he was approached by a guy in plain clothes and didn't know it was an undercover police officer. A struggle ensued and the patient took a blow to the face. Bleeding previously more severe, not only occasionally oozing, nares patent bilaterally. Multiple displaced nasal bone and septum fractures, no septal hematoma. Bleeding now stopped. Discussed patient's case with OMSF, who will evaluate the patient in the ED. No acute management per OMFS resident. They will see patient in clinic next week to evaluate surgical repair. Disposition condition good and discharge. Clinical impression acute pain, physical assault, nasal fracture. So that's the hospital report. Some you know, I don't want to say legalese, but some health and these about what is going on with my face. Okay. I guess I got a couple things here I want to talk about. This picture here, this is exactly what had happened. So this picture here. On December 7th, 2012, at around 6 p.m. on Friday night, I decided to walk to the store. I live on 319 Iowa Avenue Street in South Louisville, and I sat out on my short walk by walking north on 4th Street. I walked exactly 1 block from my house, and I was about to cross 4th Street at the 4th Street M Street intersection. I looked left, I looked right. I saw that there's no cars coming. And on the opposite side, at the stop sign on M Street, there was a car that was stopped. A plain white car that had no turn signals on, so I assumed that they was going to go straight on through and they weren't going to be making any turns. Since the road was clear, I crossed the street at the intersection, which is not illegal. That is not jaywalking. As I crossed the street, the plain white car that was stopped on uh, at the stop sign on M Street, instead of driving straight on through, it started to pull a U-turn, a donut, right in the middle of the intersection. So as the plain white car was pulling a suspicious U-turn at the 4th Street M Street intersection, they pulled right behind me, and they acted like they was going to clip my legs. Um, they were going to hit my legs, pulling up to me as close as they could, like some road rage bully. And since I didn't immediately jump out of their way, it pissed somebody off in the car, and they shouted, "Get the fuck out of the road! Get the fuck out of the middle of the road!" And then I immediately returned to "fuck you." And then that's when the plain white car, instead of waiting for me to pass by in front of them, instead they whip around to the right-hand side, drives around me, and then parks right in front of me in the middle of the street, so I can't continue walking. He blocks my path. So he pulls in the middle of the intersection, he blocks my path, and he prevents me from crossing the street where I wanted to cross. The driver of the plain white car jumps out. He's wearing a baseball cap and he's wearing a flannel. Okay? He's at no point was there any indication that these were police officers. They're crazy driving, and obscenities aside, they're driving crazy. They almost hit me. They're cussing out loud. They had nothing about their car. It wasn't like it didn't look like a police car. It didn't look like an undercover police car. It looked like just a plain white car. There wasn't any lights. There wasn't any like obvious antenna. At no point was there any indication that they were even police officers. They were crazily driving. They were shouting obscenities. They didn't have any sirens in their car, not their appearance, nor their voices. They didn't identify themselves as a police. There was nothing on them that said police, nothing on their body, nothing on. They weren't wearing a uniform. They weren't driving a cop car. So when they whipped around me, it was clear that the man in the car wanted to fight. He was already mad. Then he blocked my path to get in the street. Then he jumps out. He jumps out right in the middle of the intersection. So I don't know what's going on. I think I'm just getting jumped by some random people in some white car. And he jumps out, and he was right in front of me. So I had a choice. I could have ran away, or I could have stayed and fought. That's what he was. He got out to fight. The whole incident was bullshit. Why were these people even bothering me? Since the short white male road rage bully had blocked my path and he jumped out in front of me, I got scared. And even though I could have ran away, I stayed and I stood my ground against a menacing aggressor. And I threw a punch. And I barely hit the short white man, road rage bully, in the face. It brushed off the side. Then we scuffled for a while. The driver and I were wrestling for a while. And another man jumps out from the other side of the car and starts throwing punches. During the commotion, eventually the second man says that they're the police. So the other guy says that they're the police. And that's when I stopped and I said, "You're the police?" And they said, "Yeah," they both said. And I immediately put my hands up and I was like, okay, stop. But they kept swinging and they kept swinging punches and they was wanting to wrestle with me. And I told them, I was like, "Hey, I didn't know you all was police. Stop. They didn't care. They threw me down on the pavement. They told me to put my hands on my head. And I did. When I did, the short white male driver tried to punch me with his right hand and he wound up hitting the concrete. He missed. He ended up hitting the pavement and it hurt his hand. And then he takes his left hand and he swings as far as he back as he can and he whops me right in the nose. When he swings his left hand with the cowboy punch and nails me straight in the nose, immediately it breaks it and blood just gushing out everywhere. The short white male road rage bully hit me after I had my guard down. So once they said that there was a police, that's when I said, "Okay, I'm not fighting you guys." In fact, later on, he says if I would have ran away, that he wouldn't have chased me. So that's interesting. If I'm such a crazy criminal, he wouldn't have chased me if I would have ran away. So, but still, it was after I had let my guard down, when I was on the ground, after they said, "Put your hands on your head," I put my hands on my head, and then he hits me. So, that's bullshit. He waited till my guard was down. He waited till I was defenseless when I was just lying on the ground. I didn't even put my hands up to stop him. And that's when he punched me. So, I know legally you're not allowed to resist arrest, run away, or fight back, right or wrong that it may be. So when they told me there was a police, that's when the incident had stopped. They handcuffed me. They pulled me off to the side of the street, started asking me questions about who I was. Blood was gushing out of my nose, onto my clothes and sweatpants and my white jacket for at least an hour before the EMS and the ambulance service finally got there. I didn't even know my nose was broken until the EMS man started laughing. He's like, "Wow, they really bent your nose all out of shape." Then I went to the hospital for about 3 or 4 hours, and the two cops who beat me up stayed there to make sure I was arrested, charged with a felony, and then they sent me to jail. In jail, I also got roughed up and molested, attacked again. The road rage bully said that he was chasing a robbery. There's a robbery in place. That's why he had to pull a donut in the middle of 4th Street in order to go after this robber. But if there is a robber in place, why are you going to mess with this, supposed jaywalker over a robber? It seems like a robbery is more important than somebody crossing the street. They said they wanted to charge me with jaywalking, but actually I got the police report, and that's not what they charged me with. But I looked at the law, and it says that by law, drivers must yield to pedestrians under the following conditions: when pedestrians are in a crosswalk or they're at an intersection and there is no traffic light. So there's an intersection, there's no traffic light, the pedestrian has the right of way on M and 4th Street. I was not illegal. He was the one that was about to run over me. He was the one that was in the wrong. That's where the first crime happens. There's a bunch of discrepancies in this case. There's definitely excessive force by the police officers. They waited till I was on the ground with my hands behind my head before they landed a punch straight in my nose, which busted it up to pieces. There's no probable cause for them to stop me, harass me, question me, or anything. There's absolutely no reason for them to stop me. I was just walking down the street to the store. Once they started to harass me, once they nearly ran me over, they were cussing at me, and then they blocked my path from crossing 4th Street. They're in a plain white car. Short white man wearing a flannel and a baseball cap jumped out right in the middle of 4th Street. He didn't have a uniform on. There was no sirens blaring. Nothing on the car indicated that they were police, and they didn't identify themselves as the police. To me, this is some random road rage bullying asshole and his buddies. Just some random douchebag looking for trouble, looking to jump somebody. And, frankly, I didn't feel like running. This road rage bully was pissed because I didn't jump out of the way. When he tried to clip my legs, I didn't jump out of his way. He pulled his car within inches to the back of my leg. But I wasn't intimidated by the car bullying tactics, and that's why they shouted for me to get the fuck out of the road. They tried to clip my legs out from under me, and when I didn't jump out of their way, that's when they got pissed off and they shouted obscenities. And then I shouted obscenities right back, and then they sprung into action, pulled in front of me, and jumped out of the car. The cop undercover, who seems like plain clothes. I don't know how they would look any different, like on their day off. Seems like that would look like it would be on their day off too, wearing regular clothes and driving a regular car. When he punched, the guy who punched me said that there was actually cameras all over the street poles, and I didn't see any cameras anywhere. So there's a lie, so he's willing to lie. They're charging me with assaulting a police officer, resisting arrest, jaywalking. All this happened just 1 block from my house. The cop who punched me even asked the sergeant to just cite and release. So the cop who punched me just said, "Hey, let's have a cite and release, and let's just, let this matter be resolved." They just wanted to give me a ticket and not let the whole thing go through the court system. The 2 officers and the sergeant were chummy with me after the incident during the hospital stay, so it seemed like they knew that they were in the wrong. From my perspective, here's a plain white car that tried to run me over, or aggressively pulled in front of my walking path after cussing out obscenities with a short white man in a baseball cap and a flannel jacket who jumped out wanting to fight me. When the other man showed up and said that they were police officers, when they finally identified themselves, that's when I stopped fighting back. Once I stopped fighting back, they punched me square in the nose. They hit a man who wasn't even trying to defend himself. My hands and arms were up behind my head. Even though they said they were driving all crazy for a robbery, they didn't have their sirens on. Nor was the robbery important enough after they ran into me. The undercover police officers had no reason to stop me. They didn't identify themselves. They were acting dangerously and unprofessionally and allowed their hatred to get the best of them. In Kentucky, U-turns are legal, so he is allowed to do a legal U-turn as long as you see 500 feet on both sides. You can do a U-turn in the middle of the intersection or a donut in the middle of the intersection, but the pedestrian has a right of way. So do your donut, make sure there's no cars coming, 500 feet clearance on both sides, and once you got 500 feet clearance and there's no pedestrians, go ahead and do your donut. Go ahead and do your U-turn or do your circle in the middle of the intersection. That's KRS 189.400. So U-turns are dangerous, though. There's an illegal U-turn killed 68-year-old Betty McKenzie in Powell County on June 6, 2012. So U-turns are dangerous even though they are technically legal. Um, I wonder if there's a videotape in the car. If there's any videotape, if not, why not? The sirens weren't on, so I don't think that it would have been turned on. I got the hospital report, the police report, corrections report, but not all the names of all those who are involved. So.